Today, in lesson 2 of the Bible lesson series, I'm going to talk about the Bible canon and the documents that make it up. What we're looking at here, first of all, is before I do any kind of study on the Bible or anything else, you should know how to determine true from false. This word epistemology is the study of knowledge and justified belief. It's concerned with the following questions. Let me highlight that. And I think the cursor doesn't necessarily follow, what I'm seeing right now when I'm recording is not necessarily following, by the time the recording's done, the cursor seems a bit off, so just go by what I highlight. Anyway, the study of knowledge, concerned with what are the necessary and sufficient conditions of knowledge, what are its sources, etc., etc. Basically, what that all means is that you have determined ahead of time a method by which you will tell true from false. And if you don't do that, if you just go by your feelings or what seems right at the time, you'll just run in circles. You won't be able to conclude anything. And if that's your method anyway, if that's your preferred method of determining true from false, then you really can't call anything false or true. You can't make a statement either way because you don't have any rationale to back up your claims. So decide on that before you do anything else. It just amazes me how many people will be just adamant that the Bible is corrupt, but they reject any offer or method of how to determine whether the Bible is corrupt. I mean, how can you call it corrupt if you don't even know how to tell true from false? That's why that's important. The fact that we know that there's corruption, as I've mentioned before, I think, is proof that the truth can be discovered. Because covering up the truth is never perfect. And by applying these methods, we can get a pretty good idea of where the corruption lies. Now this page that I put up here, Tectonics, I don't agree with everything at the site, but this particular article on one of the theories about who would have assembled the Bible is called the Roman Pizzo theory. Allegedly, a family of Romans conspired to make up this story of Jesus, basically to subvert Judaism, but this is really easily dismissed. The article, you can read the details of how they dismiss it, but basically the Romans in general did not care what anybody believed as long as they accepted the whole Roman pantheon of gods. So, if you rejected any part of it, then you were considered an atheist. So the Romans had no desire, no motivation to subvert anybody else's beliefs for any reason, much less, particularly Jewish Messiah or anything else. So not only is there no evidence that this Roman family did any such thing, there's no motivation. It makes no sense at all. That's like saying that because, that even though I'm not from India and I don't know anything about their religions, that somehow I conspired to subvert their religions for, because I consider them a threat to my own. That's just ridiculous. It's a silly argument on every level. But probably, that's a fairly minor critique of the Bible canon and the Bible origins. Probably the biggest one is Zeitgeist. And this page I'm showing you here is a very good detailed rebuttal of Zeitgeist. And basically Zeitgeist claims that the Bible borrowed from or plagiarized earlier religious concepts and simply adopted them. But this rebuttal shows that the claims are often a complete fabrication, and many of the alleged borrowed concepts arose after the New Testament was written, not before. So it's actually backwards from what people say. The Bible borrowed from this and that. Well, the things it allegedly borrowed were invented after the Bible. So, and ironically, those who bash the Bible in spite of 2,000 years of scrutiny and evidence for it, they will blindly swallow the claims of Zeitgeist as indisputable truths. In other words, as soon as people hear a contrary idea about the Bible, they accept the contrary idea on blind faith, while demanding hypocritically that the Bible jump through all kinds of hoops, and never-ending hoops, because they're never satisfied, to prove its authenticity. Yet, they pick up a scrap of paper on the ground that says something different, and suddenly the Bible is disproved and the truth has been hidden, etc. So this is very poor reasoning on the critic's part. Now, there are a lot of other more scholarly and deeper, more technical pages that I will link to in the description about Old Testament manuscripts, how they're dated and how the New Testament is dated, various collections such as the Chester Beatty Papyri collection, the Center for New Testament Manuscripts. You can even go to a place called New Testament Virtual Manuscript Room and look at them yourself. University of Michigan Papyrology Collection, a fragment of the Gospel of John from 130 A.D., the John Rylands manuscript, which is one proof that the New Testament was written very early, and a discussion of the Dead Sea Scrolls and Gnostic Gospels. So once again, you can pursue all those links that are in the description, and if you don't choose to pursue them, then don't call yourself a Bible critic. Because if you just want to pick up a random, copy of the Bible and read it once and say you're an expert, then I've got a bridge to sell you. Now, this site, A Christian Think Tank, is a very good site. I don't think it's updated anymore and hasn't been for quite a while from what I can tell. I think the owner had some health issues or some other issues that came up. But it's very thorough technical research and touches on a lot of the more popular criticisms of the Bible. And it would take you quite a while to go through it. You can download the whole thing. There's a link here somewhere to download the entire think tank content. It's right down here, way at the bottom, about the tank. It's the last link. You can download the whole site. So if you want to be a real Bible critic, you should do something like that and read the links and get some basic facts about the Bible that you won't find in the typical Bible critic site. Now, as far as choosing which text to include in the canon, first of all, nobody claims God dictated the list or gave official sanction to any of it. So yes, it was compiled by fallible humans. But the character of the humans is the key, and like any other past events or documents, we can investigate the character of the people and study other evidence around the people and events to set the probability that their writings are legitimate. And in the case of Bible writers, anytime someone claimed to be a prophet of God, whatever they predicted had to come true 100% of the time in every detail. One miss and they were out. They were even put to death, because that's how serious God was about making sure that the people weren't led astray. And often the Bible has the phrase, a lot of people know the Middle English phrase, "Thus saith the Lord," which just means, this is what God says. Whenever you see that phrase, that indicates a direct message from God. So logically, this means that the words written outside of that context are not direct messages from God. So then we fall back to the character of the writer, and if it had been proven that this person was a genuine prophet, their other writings or sayings were considered wise and trustworthy. And I have a series at my archived blog that I'll put the links in the description of 3 articles on the Bible, inspiration, and inerrancy. So you might want to read those on how it was that any individual document was considered approved by God. I don't want to say necessarily inspired in the sense that God dictated, but inspired in the sense that it was exactly what God wanted recorded. So look at that series for those details. And this might not sound like much to go on. We're looking at probability. And as I've said before many times, everybody only deals with probability, but we can be certain about things in our own mind, and there's nothing arrogant about that. A lot of people are very certain that a certain ideology is absolutely correct, and it doesn't even have to be a religious ideology. Yet that doesn't make them arrogant. It only crosses the line into arrogance if you try to impose your certainty on others. But there's nothing wrong with expressing your own certainty for your own personal convictions. That is not arrogant. So, because I've heard a lot of people say, well, anybody who says they absolutely know, this or that is arrogant. That's not true. In fact, the statement saying so is arrogant, if you want to define it, precisely. So, even though we don't have absolute proof of what the canon should be, we have a pretty good probability and good rationale. Now, in spite of the fact that the Bible took over 1,400 years to assemble, all the book from the writing of the first book to the writing of the last book, they have a unified theme. It is the creation, the fall, and the redemption of mankind through the Messiah, Jesus, who would be a sacrificial lamb, such that whoever accepted his sacrifice would be reconciled to God. So to have that kind of unity in a collection of writings spanning that much time, written by over 40 writers on several different continents, is certainly a factor to consider. And when Jesus said that not the least stroke of a pen would disappear from the law till everything was fulfilled, and he said that in Matthew 5:18 and Luke 16:17, when he said that nothing would disappear from the law till it was fulfilled, he was referring specifically to the law. And that law was specifically for the Jews, and he did fulfill it in all at his death and resurrection. And when we consider that we literally do not have any of the original strokes of a pen of any part of the Bible, then clearly Jesus' statement does not apply to our human writings, but to whatever God originally spoke. So when Jesus said that, people use that as an excuse to say, well, you can't question the canon, you can't question my translation that I prefer. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about the words of God. Because if you want to claim otherwise, then you have to show me an original document that has not lost a stroke of a pen, and you can't. Now, I'm going to move on next to the idea of how to interpret the Bible. Even though this is really just about the canon and documents, it's important to ask yourself why you're studying the canon and documents in the first place. Because a lot of people believe that the whole Bible is just an allegory or a moral lesson, or some call theological messaging. And they believe this regardless of context or any other factor. They see it as if it were all written at once instead of over that 1,400-year span. So if I argue that a certain section of the Bible does not apply to us today, the critics will call it cherry picking. But the fact is that it's only cherry picking if you ignore the context. In other words, I'm doing the opposite of cherry picking. I'm not just arbitrarily saying this part of the Bible doesn't apply to us today. I'm saying it because I'm considering the context. And if you don't consider the context, you're the one who's cherry picking. And we could see that any, surface reading of the Bible, that God deals with people in different ways in different ages. So if you take what rules God gives to mankind in one age and try to apply them to another, you're cherry picking. You're taking things out of context. Now, some people don't believe that there's any such thing as different ages, but I don't know how it's possible to reach that conclusion when you read the Bible, because obviously things change. They changed at very specific points such as the fall of man when Adam and Eve sinned and were expelled from the Garden of Eden. They changed again at the Great Flood. They changed again specifically just for the descendants of Abraham and the system of law that Moses instituted. They changed again when Jesus came, and they'll change again in the future. So to ignore the changes is once again to ignore the context and cherry pick. So you have to consider context with the Bible like you would with anything else. Now, if the Bible is just an allegory or a fiction or something, why is it that so many atheists are obsessed with proving it to be false? I mean, who does that with anything else but the Bible? And if it's an allegory or a fiction, but just part of it, how do you decide where the allegory stops and the true part, literal part begins? Because once you use the allegorical interpretation, you got no rational way of determining its boundaries. And if you can't say that any part of the Bible is literal, then how can you call it Christianity because you can't believe that Jesus rose from the dead? And so this allegorical approach is flawed on its foundation because you don't know true from false. You don't have any method of telling true from false, just as I started out by saying about epistemology. Without that method, what's the point? And even if you say you just follow the teachings of Jesus, so, here again, how do you know they're his teachings? So if you're going to either flame the Bible or allegorize it, then it's everything else you do is pointless, because you can get moral tales from anywhere and you can get fiction from anywhere. And why is it that so many people have spent their life studying it and even died for it sometimes just for having a Bible or translating it? People don't do that for Aesop's fables. They don't do it for moral lessons. So in other words, people's reactions to the Bible are the biggest evidence of its supernatural source, and there's something different about this, because no other book of fiction or allegory gets these kind of reactions out of people in these numbers for this long of a time. Nobody cares whether the content of the Quran or the Vedas is accurate, or what moral lessons you can cherry pick. Nobody gets all excited about some scrap of pottery or papyrus and that says, oh boy, this proves, the Vedas wrong or the Book of Mormon wrong. They don't do that with any other book. And you need to ask yourself why, and why it is that Jesus, rather than Buddha or anybody else, gets this kind of special treatment. So, if you're going to study and critique the Bible and the canon and get all worked up about what's in it and why it's in it and whether you think something's lost even though you can't prove what the original list was, then you need to have a reason. I mean, if the Bible isn't literal and shouldn't be taken in context and shouldn't consider the genre or the topic, then you're just wasting your time. And I don't understand your reaction to it. So, I think that's about all I have to say about this topic. And as soon as I can, I don't know yet what the next topic will be, but when I do, I'll put it up. Usually I'm trying to do this every Monday, so thanks for watching.